Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Sim Sundays podcast. This week was a really interesting chat. I sat down with Tobin Leigh. Now, Tobin Leigh might not be a name that you've heard of, but I guarantee he's been involved in something that you've seen or watched in the sim racing space. He started off his career as a professional driver for F4H, Veloce and Lazarus before moving to become the project manager of a little brand called Quadrant. He then moved from Quadrant into Veloce as a general project manager there, where he worked with McLaren, the Miami Formula One Grand Prix. He's worked with Ferrari. He is instrumental in the organization and creation and branding of a lot of the F1 teams, esports teams. He's also an advisor at the British Esports Association. And excitingly, he's just started his own company called PACENOTE, where he's advising brands on how to use gaming and use sim racing to further their brand with the younger, more exciting demographic. So here we go. Tobin Leigh, professional esports driver turned business mogul extraordinaire. Welcome to the show. How was the intro for you? How do you feel?
Well, to be honest, I feel slightly like I'm in a condescending environment now. No. It's all good. It's all good. It's probably very accurate. The professional, slightly sad, but yeah.
Once an esports driver, always an esports driver, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But interesting, your journey, because you've kind of taken esports and driving, and you've moved into the world of esports business, sim racing business. You're working with big names like Veloce. You've worked with Ferrari. You've raced with Max Verstappen. There's big brands, big names that you've managed to hit all very quickly, right?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, everything's just happened so fast, but I think that a lot of it is down to the fact that I think one of the biggest things I've learned recently, especially, is like if you want stuff to happen quickly, you can. You don't have to settle in. Right. And I think one thing I've learned about myself, especially in the last few months, is I'm someone that just needs to keep that momentum going. And if it's not going, then I feel a bit bored, to be honest. And so yeah, I think stuff moves very fast. But I think it's probably quite a lot of it is down to the fact that I get bored, to be honest, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, it would be pretty boring if things didn't move fast, right? I don't know how people work in huge corporate environments where it's going to take 3 months to change a fire safety sign on a door because 1,000 people need to sign off on it. Blah, blah. I'm falling asleep as I'm talking. But if I go through your CV, it's all there. If there is one kind of theme, one core tenet that runs all the way through what you've done, it's fun. Nothing on your kind of your CV, your experience list is ordinary. You've clearly come out of school and then you've just had fun for the last 7 years. And I absolutely love that the first entry on your LinkedIn page is professional Forza 4 Horizon motorsport player. That is I don't know how many people have got that on there. I noticed that's the one without a logo because who do you report to in that instance?
Yeah, I mean, so that actually was F4H. So F4H was the first team I raced with, and that was my first organization I'd ever been a part of, because I was 16 at the time or something.
Yeah.
A lot of the people I work with in there, I worked with throughout my career as well. So yeah, I mean, big shout out to Nathan Tague with that one, because I remember
Nathan Tague, friend of the show. He's been on the show.
Yeah, friend of the show. I remember, not to ramble on too much, but I remember being in a maths lesson when I was at secondary school, and then getting a phone call saying, "Oh, hey Tobin, do you want to be part of?" Genuinely, I was in a maths lesson,
and you took the call.
I took a call in the class.
Times have changed since I was at school. Yeah. I'm telling you, right, sorry, can I just stop you there one second? I need to take this call.
Yeah, someone wants me for their Forza team. One sec.
Sorry, I've got business to attend to.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, it was really good. And but yeah, you're right as well with fun. I one thing that I think I'm quite lucky with as well is like looking back at my CV. I've never ever had a job interview in my life. I've never done like a normal job. Just I think a lot. Obviously, I'm very fortunate. I found my feet in just something that's fun, something that's lucrative, and something that I enjoy. And so therefore, I just tried to stick at it and just make from this whole space what I will. And
Yeah, well, why
yeah,
not?
it's
Like
not too bad.
you definitely you're kind of following your passion, but I mean, you started in sim racing, or you started in sim racing well before it was what it is now. So you've definitely taken the rough with the smooth. You definitely got on the train very, very early, and now obviously it's made you one of the very few people that have the expertise that you have. And we'll get on to PACENOTE and what PACENOTE is, how PACENOTE started, and the incredible story that I want to relive about your decision to do to start PACENOTE. But let's just start a little bit earlier. So you played, so you were a professional player for FRH, Veloce, and Lazarus. So you did quite a lot, right? So that's 4 years from 2016 to 2020, where you were as pro, semi-pro. Like, I mean, back then, were there pro players and semi-pro players, or was it all voluntarily, like voluntary based? Like, what was it like? I can imagine the sim racer of today wouldn't recognize the landscape back in 2016, 2017.
Yeah. Well, I think the landscape now is like directly derived, obviously, from what it was back in 2016. So, kind of to set the scene, back then, there were the F1 games were a thing, Gran Turismo was a thing, iRacing was all a thing, and there's been a lot of sim racing, but it was all a lot more kind of covered over. Like you really had to like investigate, especially I found, and there may be hardcore sim racers out there that disagree, but for me, like looking into iRacing and all of the stuff that's so common now, like AC, you had to really dig in and investigate and put some effort in. But one of the big games that were prevalent back then, especially in terms of prize money offering, was Forza. Now, Forza don't do anything now because they pulled funding on it, basically, because it didn't get great viewership. But back in the 2016 days and a little bit before that as well, Forza had probably the biggest prize pool of any sim racing game like that was out there, like other than the occasional one-off big mega event in like with like Formula E, that one that had £1 million or whatever. But basically Forza was a great lucky place really, because I enjoyed that game and I got on really well with it. And essentially they, like Microsoft, were going big on this sim racing thing back then. It was too early, as we found out, but yeah, it was a big space back then.
Well, it's interesting because you obviously weren't going through that period of your life with your eyes shut. You're obviously not just there to drive. A lot of sim racers, maybe consciously or subconsciously, kind of try and imitate the real world drivers, and they say like, I don't like all the fuss around it, all I want to do is drive. And then occasionally you hear sim racers saying the same thing, all they want to do is get out and race, right? Which, fair enough. It sounds like during your period as a professional racer, semi-pro racer, whatever you would class yourself as, actually you were watching with interest the space you were in, what was happening, who was moving into it, what it was developing into. And it sounds like maybe what you've now created is a culmination of all those experiences.
Yeah, I'd agree. But you say like watching, that makes me sound like I was a little kid that was like out there with like an agenda to really research, take notes, see
Bigging
who's
you up,
going to
man.
do. Yeah, but I wasn't at all. I just really I really wanted to win Forza Racing Championship. Basically, that's all I set out to do. And so my first tournament that I ever did was when I was 16 in F4H, like I spoke about earlier. And that was at the 24 hours of Le Mans.
Yeah.
And basically, at the 24 hours of Le Mans, Microsoft were doing like their Forza esports series at the same time as the real 24-hour race. And I turned up there. I had no idea that LAN events were a thing before I'd been there. I just got invited because I did well on an online tournament. But I came like 13th in the world at Forza in my first event. And for me, like at 16, 17, whatever I was, I just remember thinking like, damn, like that's pretty good. Like, and the prize pool there, like you earn, it was like $1,000 back then. And at that age, honestly, if you're hauling that in from playing Forza, like I was this could be huge.
You were the cool kid at school, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's actually a really good kind of topic in itself, because I, for ages, was too ashamed, dare I say it, to like say that I was doing it, because when I started, esports had the level of shame about it. It wasn't like it is now.
Yeah.
And basically on that, all that changed because I did my first tournament that I just mentioned at Le Mans, and after I did it, like word did get out, because I'd done quite well. Word did get out. I did tell some of my friends, and then they spread. And basically, it got to some of the kind of senior teachers at my school, and they came up to me and they called me for like a meeting with like the equivalent of like the headmaster of the sixth form at the time. And they were like, what are you doing? So I told them why I'd been like out of school, and basically they were like so impressed that they convinced me to do like a whole school like assembly. So I just stood up at the front at 16, like basically telling people why esports is so good. And people, like, again, I was pretty like, wow, people might just think I'm really sad here, but I did it, and probably some people thought I was sad. I'm sure maybe I would have, but
those people are the ones that are now buying esports merch from when they watch. Yeah, exactly. Probably. It all comes around.
A lot of people though, like really, really loved it, and I think that's the kind of, I think that's probably deep down something that inspired me to like keep going with gaming and esports. So
it's a nice story. You don't often hear. I don't know. I feel like the schools get a bad rap, teachers get a bad rap. Everyone remembers the horror days of school and how they weren't supported here and they weren't supported there, and they could have done a lot better here and whatever. But it's nice to hear that actually you were kind of inspired by the I guess the interest that they showed in what you were doing. And back then, it's because when I was at school, playing PlayStation was a distraction from homework and coursework, and parents would hate it when you were doing it because it was just dead time, and teachers were like, you can't make a living playing video games, blah 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 blah. Where actually you're one of the exceptions where you were kind of doing it at school and then have taken it all the way through to a career. And again, we'll get on to that shortly. But it's nice to hear of a school that's kind of seen that, okay, well, this is probably a space that's growing. Gaming is growing. This is a worthwhile use of somebody's time. It's impressive. We should celebrate it.
Yeah. But although my school was a bit weird, actually thinking about it, because not weird, but I was really lucky because, for example, one time I was in a lesson, and again I had an email to my school email, and it was from a biology teacher that I'd never had any lessons from this teacher, but I'd heard of him, and he was like, "Hey, Tobin, like I heard you had success in esports. Like, funny enough, I'm part of the British Esports Association, and I'm like the main man trying to push getting gaming into schools, and
wow.
I'm well through the project. So do you want to catch up?" And so that's a guy called Tom Dorr. He is part of the British Esports Association. He's leading up the education side of bringing gaming into schools, like I said. And he, again, like I was very lucky because there's not many people that are in the British Esports Association or even in any esports orgs across the board, but to have someone in my school that was like working in it already, again, it was like proof in the pudding that there's something here. It was a bit weird. Like, it was a bit weird, but in a really good way.
Yeah. I feel like that's probably not a common experience that people have when they get involved in gaming when they're at school. So you were lucky, I guess, in a way. But although you weren't lucky to have become 13th in the world at Forza, I think that's probably quite a lot of practice involved in that.
Yeah, a lot of practice, a lot of sweat.
But so then quickly after, I'm looking at this here. So July 2021, project manager at Quadrant. Now, everybody listening will know what Quadrant is, and they'll understand the concept of it and how huge Quadrant now is. How did that happen? How did you get involved? Obviously, you probably networked with a lot of people as a gamer in the previous 5 years up to that point. But tell us how the introduction, the first meeting to Quadrant happened.
Yeah. So the story again begins when I was a driver, because my second team I represented was back then quite an unknown team, but it was Veloce Esports. And basically, when Veloce were first founded, they were obviously getting their legs going, and one of their strategies was to enter into different esports tournaments. And they picked Forza as a pretty good one to get involved in, and they also got me on as one of their 3 drivers. So basically, because I was representing them back then, I got to know everyone in Veloce, and obviously that links heavily to Quadrant, which I'll get onto in a second. But basically, I was able, again, fluke, I'll be honest, but it was nice. I managed to use the gaming to like build the network in the space. And basically, once I did my business degree, and I was done, at that time, Forza and everything was wrapping up. My esports career, like in Forza, was looking quite like there wasn't too much of a future there, because, as I said, Microsoft were pulling all the funding. And I didn't want to do that anyway full time. I wanted to get into business. And so I reached out to Jamie, who's Chief Sporting Officer at Veloce. And he was my manager all the way through that job. And someone I learned like a lot from. And it was funny because he also looked after me when I was a driver back in the day. But basically, I was able just to reach out to Jamie and ask him, are there any jobs going? McLaren were new on their books back in the day, so I knew that I might have a chance. And Nathan, who we spoke about earlier, he was in Veloce, so I managed to basically convince him to give me a good word.
Nice.
And then off the back of that, I got into Veloce, and then it was from there that I was then able to get into Quadrant, as you mentioned, because Quadrant is all operated by Veloce. And so essentially, like, there's a sub team of people in Veloce that just work on Quadrant, and I was very lucky to be part of that for quite some time.
Yeah, it must have. I mean, when Quadrant was launched, there was a lot of hype around it. Like, obviously, Lando Norris's involvement, and then the kind of wacky, like very kind of like tongue in cheek, very kind of, I don't know, maybe Gen Z style of communication that it had. It was very kind of fresh. It must have been quite cool to be involved in something that probably felt very different to other brands that you'd seen up to that point.
Yeah, because it's not like Quadrant is not a sim racing brand. That's the thing. It's very much more than even, to me, it's more than even like an esports brand in many ways, because it focuses on creating a cool like clothing line. It's about the content. It's about, lifestyle, about cars and rally and all this cool stuff. So it was a really good, like, the thing for me, and the main value I think I'll always take away from Quadrant is like, it really teaches you to open your eyes, and everyone there is really good at like doing more than like the first thing that would come to your mind in terms of being creative with what content you're going to make, or what clothes the designs that they do, and all of that. It's quite deep, but being part of that team taught me a lot about like striving for high quality, and every other team, don't get me wrong, but Quadrant's definitely one where they pride themselves for like really trying to go above and beyond all the time. So it was really good.
The job sounds nuts, like Miami Grand Prix and Goodwood and all those experiences, going to the shoots, like the jet, like the freaking military jet that you used for like the apparel. Like it sounds to me like it's not a real job. Like, is it fair to say that you've not had, quote unquote, a real job? Or, and I know I'm being purposely like facetious here with this question, or is it actually there is a lot of kind of spreadsheets, processes, compliance, emails that goes on in the background? Like, what's it like for somebody listening who's thinking, I want to work in gaming because it sounds like a lot of fun, it looks like a lot of fun? Is there a reality behind that where actually there is a lot of kind of just kind of corporate sort of process that you have to learn as you go along, and it's It's not all what it looks like. Like, give us the inside scoop on what it's like to work in a gaming environment like that.
Yeah, well, I think in short, it's very fun. It is very fun. I think the tough thing that you've got to consider with it is one thing I found specifically on like being more of a serious gamer and then working in it afterwards is if you work quite like if you take a game really seriously and then go and work in it, it can take the fun away. That's one point. I could talk about that for ages, but when you take it seriously, it can take the fun away. But from a more like corporate, if you're just getting, you just got a regular background and you want to come into gaming, I think the key challenge with it is you have to be really good because it is really competitive and you have to like be prepared to just go above and beyond and just be the best like at that as you can be. And then I think that goes a long way, if that makes sense. But it's just a good job, and there's not too much.
It makes sense. I guess the demand from people wanting to work in those jobs is very, very high. Like lots of people would want to work in that kind of job, and so therefore the supply has to meet it. And if you want to be the supply, that means you have to be the top of a much larger field. It sounds as well like the networking that you did in the lead up to that job has really helped. Like you already knew a few people within the organization. Now, from what I can tell from my brief, 3 years in this sim racing world, is that network is everything. Like it's actually a really small group of people who are running kind of I'm talking sim racing now, not gaming, because obviously there's a lot of people working in gaming generally. But in terms of people who are running projects, brands, manufacturers in sim racing, everyone seems to know each other. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, big time. I think if you don't speak to people in this space, then you kind of, it's tough luck to try and do much with it. I there's a lot of like learning to be done by talking with other people, and on that I think it's great it being small, but I think it's also like a disadvantage with it being small as well, because I think other industries, like when there's more people, there's that kind of almost like it's almost like the ceiling's potentially higher, and that's like that's a challenge of the sim racing space at the moment, really, with like it needs something to happen, I think, where the ceiling and the potential for people to be involved is like much higher than what it appears to be at the moment. But again, that's quite a generic thing to state. But I think all in all, that's great. And yes, network's so important, and everyone's brilliant in the space.
So again, and I'm trying to kind of like steer this conversation in a way that is beneficial for people listening who might want to work in gaming, sim racing, etc. Like, what's your technique? What's your method? How do you go about putting yourself out there, going to events, meeting people, like just reaching out on, I don't know, LinkedIn or Discord and asking for calls with people and introducing yourself and your skills to different organizations? Like, what's your approach to that? And if somebody was listening who was like, I want to get into gaming, like, where should they start?
This is actually something that I picked up on quite a lot since starting my own business, actually, because I'm in the position now where people are reaching out to me with this stuff, and so it's given me a great insight. And without a doubt, the number one thing you should do is just start working for yourself. And by that I mean, if you're trying to make YouTube content, then start doing it. Or if you want to get advice on a business or something, or something, just make a business plan or just do something, because there's so many people reach out and like want advice, but when it comes to actually doing something, most people don't for some reason. And so if you just do it and you just show that you've got intent behind whatever you're trying to learn or whatever you're trying to do, and if you can show rather than tell, you're going to be you'll actually get somewhere. But I think most people just talk, and it
well, there's a genuine fear, and I think there's good reason for that fear. Like, most people will be in a job that pays a regular salary, and they've bought a flat, or they're renting a place, and they've got a car and it's on finance, and they've got bills that they have to pay. And so the salary that they have matches all of those responsibilities that they've racked up. And so to start your own business, you need to either risk the fact that you're going to keep making that money from month one, which is incredibly unlikely, or you need to save, which is obviously difficult, especially at the moment, or you need to go out and somehow get a loan, which is risky if you can't pay it back and your idea doesn't work out, or you need to go and find investment. And that's a whole different thing that takes a lot of time, a lot of knowledge, a lot of patience, and a lot of heartache to achieve. So I remember, so we met up in London. How long was it now? Maybe 6 months ago, I think. Maybe less, maybe longer. I don't know.
3.
Time is a weird concept at the moment. 3 months. Was it 3 months?
Yeah.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah, it was start of Feb.
Oh my goodness! It feels like 6 months ago at least.
Yeah.
And at that point, you kind of had the idea, and it was the concept, and it was I'm thinking of doing this, but it hadn't necessarily kind of committed to doing it. So what was it? And then obviously the next time we spoke, I think you'd done it, or you kind of you kind of like taken that step that meant you were going to do it. So what was it in that period where you were like, oh, you know what, sod it, I'm going to do it?
Well, like, to be honest, so in terms of starting my own business, it's just something I've always wanted to do. I think when I was in my last job, like deep down, I think just in my heart, I knew that the only thing that I could do to like fulfill what I actually enjoy doing on a day-to-day is to just risk it all. And that's genuinely what I did. I left my job with nothing. I had absolutely nothing. I had a little bit in savings to last probably until now, before I'm homeless.
Right.
Like literally. And I just left because I knew that I had to, like, I think it's called like finding your ikigai or something. I had to just go.
Finding your ikigai.
Yeah, what is it?
I don't know, but I love the sound of that. I want to.
Ikigai.
Yeah. How we spelling that?
It is. So ikigai, Ikigai, is a Japanese concept that means your reason for being. And so iki is life and gai is value or worth in Japanese. So finding your ikigai is like your life's work. That's like what you're supposed to find. When you were like, you're what? I was like, am I chundering my words? But no.
No, you're obviously just far more educated than I am.
No, so for me, like deep down, I knew that doing my own thing and just sending it and just being responsible for what I'm doing is just what I needed to do. So I took the step and I just risked everything and just had faith that it would work out. But so
before you reveal whether or not you're having to live on the streets from the end of this month onwards, why don't you give us the pitch, right? Not to put you on the spot, but let's hear the elevator pitch of this business concept that you've come up with and have now started. And I mean, spoiler, we're speaking quite regularly at the moment, I know is a massive success. So what's the pitch? Tell us what PACENOTE is.
So PACENOTE is a one-stop shop, and the solution is where basically if you're a brand and you want to be in esports, then you can come to PACENOTE and we can just sort everything for you. So if you want your own team, we can sort that for you. If you need expertise and advice on something you're already doing, we can sort you out. Like we can do everything or hook you up with the right people to enable you to be in esports and gaming. Slightly long-winded. You did fully put me on the spot. Yeah, but essentially,
it's fine. We've got time to unpack that. I realized at the time, I was like, oh, is this really unfair, or is it? I think I totally get what that is, right? It's and actually, the interesting thing is, like, a lot of companies will be very like narrow and they'll kind of stick to like a particular lane. But actually, if you look back through your experience, actually, it makes total sense when you say, the one-stop shop for esports. If a brand wants to use esports to further its marketing efforts or increase its fan engagement or to build its community, then PACENOTE can help. Because actually, when you look at your experience, you've done a bit of everything from branding to esports to community. So it's, as a consultancy, you're one of the very few people in the sim racing world, at least, who could genuinely say we can do a bit of everything. And I'm using the royal we at the moment, but I know you have plans to grow the business. So, okay, so I mean, it's incredibly exciting, and I did put you on the spot, so apologies for that. But it doesn't really matter, because I'm going to ask questions rather than say anything, because I don't know how much I can say versus how much I can ask, because I don't want to reveal anything that shouldn't be revealed. So I'm just going to ask questions at this point. Stay safe. So let's go right back to the beginning then. Okay. So, and again, this is for the benefit of anybody who's thinking about doing something in sim racing or doing something in gaming and working in their passion. But going to like a really micro level, right? You've left your job, salary done, it's cut, and it's now up to you. Day one, you sit down in your spare room, office, whatever you have, you open your laptop, right? What's your emotion at that point? Like, right, here we go. I'm going to build this thing called PACENOTE. Now, I mean, I know that reality is probably you thought about it quite a lot up to that point, but tell us what it's like on that first day.
Yeah, well, genuinely, when I say on the first day I had no idea, I mean that. Like, PACENOTE didn't exist. I didn't even have a clue. In fact, I wanted to, first thing I wanted to do is I knew I wanted to create a business in sim racing. And so basically, though, I sat down and I was just hyped. I just couldn't wait. And I've always had it in the back of my mind, there's a real opportunity in sim racing and helping people. And so basically, I'm lucky. I've got a great mentor that I was speaking to quite regularly, especially at the beginning. And I would just be brainstorming, throwing ideas around and just seeing how we could get the party on the road. But I wish I could be more specific, but it really was like I was literally like watching the bank watching my money just go down like rapidly, and just thinking, oh man, that's sad. But but it's so worth it. It's so worth it. And then it all went from there.
I mean, okay, so it all went from there. Tell us what all went from where. Like, what's happened? What is it that you've done? Who are you working with? What are the successes, and what have been the failures as well? Tell us about both.
Yeah, I can't go into too many details with clients, just because of business.
Come on, we need all the exclusives for the thumbnails, Tobin. You know this.
Yeah, I know, and a shocked face of me. But basically, I mean, I think the best way to explain everything is we have multiple clients at the moment that I'm working with, which is great, and basically it keeps the roof over my head. But I think the main thing that I'd want to talk about really is, and this is the message I'd want to get through, is that in terms of starting that business, the time that I learned the most actually was not like when you're securing clients. It was in like the trenches, if you like. It was in no man's land. And for me, so I quit my job in February, and then I was working throughout March and April primarily. And these were the 2 months where I was working hard on what PACENOTE now is, but with absolutely no validation, nothing coming back in the other way. And those months were like genuinely the toughest like months, I'd say mentally, I've ever like experienced. And that is what I've realized from that, though, and it's like what I try and tell people, especially if they want to do a business, but if they want to do anything that's going to like grow them, it's like when it's really tough, because it is at times when you're doing your own business. I'm sure you had it the same for you. It's after that, it's really, that's when success comes. But you have to just be in the trench and like think that the house is about to burn down like constantly until suddenly it's like it's brilliant. So yeah, I mean, I think that'll be my message mainly.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? Because I think by default, to really learn how your business is going to succeed, you have to fail multiple times. So you have to go out with the intention of like failing. You have to be really, really comfortable with failure. And in order to do that, you have to take a lot of risks, and you have to be really comfortable that, okay, everything that we do nothing is wasted, because if something doesn't work, you can learn quite a lot about your market, the problem you're trying to solve, and the solution that you were proposing through that process of failing. And so out the back of it, your in your case, your business concept is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So were there any assumptions that you made at the beginning that turned out not to be true once you'd started?
I mean, there are a couple, but I think all of my assumptions were on my product and what I was actually my service offering. But to be honest, like, again, I feel like this is a bit of a rubbish answer for me to give you, to be honest, but maybe not, maybe it's incredible, but
maybe it could be the most insightful thing we've ever heard.
yeah. But for me, my only assumptions really that I've ever made are on the service offering that I'm actually trying to give clients. And one really tricky thing to do in sim racing is do accurate like market research for what people want, especially businesses, because most of the time they just have an idea and then they come in and they don't even know what they want. And so you kind of have to convince them. And I made a few assumptions that I pitched to various people, and pretty much like most of the time my assumptions fall flat on their heads. and then I never do it again and I learn from it. But assumptions in terms of business, not really. But my message would be, I don't think it's bad to make assumptions, and I don't think it's bad to make an assumption and then send it. And then, ultimately, if you send it and then it's wrong and you blatantly got it wrong, at least you've then learned and you don't do it again. And so, yeah.
So to summarize the position, then you were a professional sim racer. You were then an account manager at Veloce that helped huge brands manage their marketing through gaming, managing their sim racing teams. You build up this huge amount of experience, and then you offer those services as an independent consultancy agent called PACENOTE, right? And obviously, I know that there's plans there to expand. How important do you think like hiring is going to be for this expansion? Because your success at the moment is all totally based on the value of your experience and the expertise that you've built. And so if you're pitching to a huge client and you say, well, this is what I've done in the past, these are my skills, these are my experiences, these are all sorts of things that I've learned, and here's the sort of thing that I could offer for you. And they say, great, who's going to be working on it? So-and-so is going to be working on it as the account manager. Like, where are you going to find these people who are like, because as we said before, it's a really small community, right? And you need to find people with incredibly niche knowledge who also happen to be looking for a job, who also happen to be willing to change, to come and work for like a startup. Do you think the hiring process will be a challenge, or maybe is it going to be the opposite? Is it going to be really easy?
Well, that's a really good question, Tom. You're right. The challenge is hiring, and I think that with these esports businesses, though, the beauty is that luckily this is great work. The kind of work that I get to offer, especially young people at PACENOTE, is like, these are dream jobs that I get and then offer to people. And so hiring and finding really good people actually isn't too difficult.
Sorry, did you say hiring and...
I'm just getting a phone call, which I've just hung up. And so, as I was saying...
Sorry, you said hiring and...
hiring young people. We'll go from there.
Oh,
and then I'll probably come back.
I thought you said hiring and firing really good people.
No. I probably was... Sorry, yeah. But there's really good people on offer. But the thing is, and this is a bit of a little trade secret, I think, that I'm going to pursue, but I'm happy to share, is that a lot of this work is not doesn't necessarily have to be full time. And I think that obviously in some aspects having a full-time job is superb, but I think for esports and gaming, I actually think, especially for young people, I think that freelance, part-time, contracted work to add on to people's lives on the side it's almost like part-time work gives young people the ability to turn their hobby into like their hobby that also pays them some nice cash, so that they can go and like have a bit more of a life than they would if they weren't doing it.
Or buy more sim racing equipment.
Exactly. And I think that a lot of the stuff that I'll be working on is very much things that you can outsource parts of it to especially young people wanting to start their careers, and then teach them the ropes, get them really good money for the amount of time that they're having to put in, because you're not asking for the same amount of time as a full-time job, and then go from there. But with that being said, my business is 3 months old. I'm yet to make my first hire, so that might all go. That's an assumption, and it might be wrong. So be it if it is. At least I learn.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Hiring is so important. We've been really lucky. There's 6 of us at Grid Finder. I'd say 3 of them are like the genuine like hiring process. I suppose the others were kind of like a founder, a co-founder process. And we're going to be hiring very soon for community managers, people to manage some very exciting special accounts that we're going to be hosting on Grid Finder soon. And I had the same thoughts as you, which is the advantage we have, and almost kind of, it sounds cheesy, right? But I think you and I have a lot in common. I always wanted to start my own business. 10 years at sea in the middle of that. But when I was like 18, 19, I had a little DJing business. Then I went to sea for 10 years. I came back and then did Grid Finder. So there's a weird little interlude. But other than that, but I always thought that the main motivation was creating cool jobs. Like the idea of being able to create a business which creates in turn jobs that are fun is actually a really like rewarding, really motivating factor in the whole process. And so, similar to you, be creating jobs where people can manage sim racing teams for really cool brands, or advise really cool brands about sim racing, which is all stuff they love. We're going to be doing similar sort of thing. We're like, right, we've got this brand on the books that wants to create a community. You get to run leagues as your job. Like, that's going to be really freaking cool. I suppose we have an office in Newcastle. So there's 4 of us here, and we'll look first to hire locally so that we can kind of really get to know these people. Is your plan to go totally remote? And what challenges do you think you're going to face having potentially consultants who you bring onto your books do online meetings with clients that you might not have visibility of, and yet their advice, the way they come across, the experience that they share directly reflects the value that your customer is getting from PACENOTE? Like, how do you think you'd manage that?
Yeah, again, that's also a really good question. I think so. I think lockdown and everything has obviously made it easier to have a fully remote business, and I think PACENOTE's likely to be fully remote for the foreseeable. It might not always be, because again, 3 months old. Genuinely, like I don't know what could happen. It's
Tobin, I want the business plan, right? 5 years, come on.
Yeah. But in terms of that, you're right. I think that a lot of it comes down to, like, in terms of hiring, it's all about that initial phase and being able to get to know people as people rather than just as tools, frankly. And I think, normally it's fairly, there's going to be tough bits with that, don't get me wrong, but I think normally you can tell when someone's passionate about the space. And normally if you're passionate and you can answer like pretty good questions about this stuff, or you a good manager, people person, then you can normally tell who's going to represent the brand. And for me, obviously quality of like how well you can work with a client is so important. But if you can be like good, but you're like really friendly and you just make your time working with a client like incredible, or if you're like decent but you're just the best person ever, and you're in our company chats or whatever, and you're just a legend, like you're going to do well. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, and that's another thing that I want to really bring into PACENOTE. It's like I think being a really nice place to work but also work with is actually like, I can't, it is so simple, but I think if I can achieve that with a company, then that'll be ridiculously good.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's the human part of the battle, isn't it? It's,
Yeah.
creating good jobs is not just good on paper. It's people walking into an office or logging in from home or whatever and genuinely enjoying like the environment that they're in. And I think it's interesting because, as you said, your business has been going 3 months. You need to make revenue because you need to pay the bills. So you need to make profit. So you have to decide how much you're going to pay new hires and make sure that there's still a margin on top of that to keep the operating costs of the business, on track. And so, you can't just be like, well, we're just going to go to the pub every day, or we're going to do some sim racing every day. Like, you're going to have to really drive people to work, especially in a startup. A startup is a hard place to work because often the goalposts are always moving. And, startups that hire junior people who haven't necessarily worked in corporates, they're taking people with very little experience, giving them less direction than usual, and constantly moving the goalposts of what their roles and responsibilities are as the company changes, because startups are always moving their goals and testing and adjusting and A/B testing and blah, 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 blah as they go. So you have to, I think part of the trick is to find people who are really resilient and really kind of that have a good amount of independence and initiative and are willing to come up with their own ideas and not get too attached if a project gets dropped or you change focus, or it's a really kind of demanding place to work too.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. What can I say? Yeah, it is. It's going to be tough. No, but it'll be good though. And this again links back to why I want, when it comes to hiring people, why I want to keep it pretty flexible, especially in the initial phases, because there is going to be so much stuff going on. But with that said, I still think that the opportunity, in fact, I know that the opportunity for, like, as I mentioned, people getting into sim racing and people wanting to get some experience, especially in these first few months, I don't think there's going to be a better place where you can come in, just get some top experience. I'll teach you everything I know, and kind of go from there. That's essentially it, and then we'll go from there. But I think on the topic of like being remote and in person, the thing with sim racing businesses as well is it's quite, or gaming is like gaming businesses, because I want to stress PACENOTE is not a sim racing business. It is very much like gaming. And it's just that there's like a limited talent pool in a certain geographical location, but then when you open it up to online, it becomes a bit more. So yeah, we'll see.
It's going to be fun though, either way. And I suppose something else that I was really interested by is knowing the sorts of clients that you're speaking to. Obviously not saying who they are, but they are huge. I think it's okay to say they're huge global brands. Do you ever, when you first started out with PACENOTE and you kind of arrive as PACENOTE, which is a company, and therefore there's an implication that there's a group of people here working on a project. I'm sure you kind of like dispel that very quickly, but do you ever, and I know this is a bit cliche if you've ever listened to any startup podcast ever, but have you ever felt imposter syndrome? Have you ever gone into a meeting, seen the names of the people on the call who they're working for and gone, oh my God, like, why are these people going to listen to me?
Yeah, definitely. But I'm very lucky again, and I think I got more imposter syndrome when I first started my last job with Veloce, because so in that I was looking after McLaren as their client, and I remember the first time I was in an email chain with someone from McLaren, and you just see their email footer said McLaren Racing, and you're like, Tobin, am I really meant to be, in this chain? Am I messing up? And I did actually mess up quite a lot when I first started, just because I was nervous. But I think that experience has like paid off massively now, because to me, like McLaren and Formula One teams, that is like what I'm really passionate about. And so to be in email chains and be communicating with people high up in that sport, for me was like holy moly, like what is going on? But then once I'd done that, like I don't like, there's nothing can beat that. Nothing's more intimidating than like my favorite sport and then people high up that I respect and have heard of. So yeah, I do get it, but not as much as like when I first started my last job.
I suppose a lot of imposter syndrome is fear of the unknown, and actually because you're starting your own business and you're molding that business around your previous experiences, you are kind of like the subject matter expert in the room, which is going to give you that confidence, which will in turn dispel that imposter syndrome to some extent.
Yeah.
But I want to move on to another subject, right? And because you have gone from sim racer to business owner, I want to kind of focus on that journey. And again, lots of people starting their own businesses nowadays. It's a lot easier to do it than I think it used to be. It's a lot kind of more user friendly process, if you like, with Companies House and HMRC and blah 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 blah. But that's what I want to focus on. So, what challenges have you found with setting up the rest of the business? So having your calls with whoever and selling the service, fine, that's your bread and butter, you've got that. But what about everything else? What about setting up a website, registering the company? Are you going to pay yourself? How does POE and national insurance work, and all that sort of stuff? Has that been a challenge, or has that been actually, it's a lot easier than it sounds?
Well, in summary, I think to kind of give you a bit of context about how I've approached it. So when I was a sim racer back in the day, I was technically self-employed. Well, I was self-employed, and so I got to grips with accounts and kind of having to deal with my own income and declare it and all that. In fact, I even once got fined by HMRC because I didn't do it right. And so I've had these. So genuinely, I've had all these
You're
experiences.
A veteran, then.
Yeah, I've been through ups and downs, and so basically, what it taught me is when you get my approach to it now is just pay someone that's really good to do it. So I've got great accountants, I've got people that deal with legal stuff. I've got people that just know what they're doing, because I've realized that there's no point in trying to worry about that. And also, like you say, setting up your own business, HMRC, Companies House, all of that is actually really easy. It's just I think the accounting stuff is the complicated bit, especially if we're going to become VAT registered and all the rest of it and all the different deadlines or whatever. So just get someone to do that. And that's the first thing I did.
Yeah, I absolutely love that, and I was really keen to get your take on it. That is exactly my opinion too. It's outsource the stuff that isn't your bread and butter, so you can focus on the core of your own business rather than spending 4 hours doing some accounting that somebody else could have done in 20 minutes. Just the return on investment you're going to get back for those 4 hours. If you're not, I always think that if you're paying somebody, £50 an hour to do your accounting or whatever it is, then if you doing your accounting itself is going to cost you more because of your own lost time, if you don't think your time is as valuable as that, then your business probably isn't the right one, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting. Okay, so you've gone from pro sim racer to business owner. What lessons did you learn when you were kind of super duper competitive that you've taken into PACENOTE now? Because PACENOTE feels very collaborative, so perhaps not competitive. That I can think of maybe 3 or 4 kind of sim racing consultancies, but they all kind of have their own specializations. So do you see yourself as being in a really competitive space, or do you think there's more opportunity with collaboration?
I think, well, in answer to the collaboration competitive stuff, I think that ultimately, the way I see competitiveness is I just want, I don't really care about PACENOTE being competitive. I just want to position it as best as it can be. But I do want it to be competitive in the sense of if we get a client, then I want to join with them, and then that force be really competitive in the industry that they're in. Or in the sector, or with the goals that they have. And so that's the kind of different approach to competitiveness that I would follow. And then also it's just a case of, I think there are a couple of others, but I think like you said, the sim racing space is so small that people, I think, still work together to an extent. And, if there's something that we can focus on as an industry, then I think people do it. So I don't ever get the sense that people are really fighting against each other in this space, at least not in my niche. Maybe they are, and I'm just naive, but
Yeah, there's the great phrase, the rising tide lifts all boats, right? So we're in a growing market, so the more we do together, the greater the market, the bigger the market gets, and the more exciting it gets. So I'm very conscious, right, that you're only 3 months into this journey. And it's going to be fascinating when we check back in with you, like in a year's time, and you can tell us who all these big names are, and you can tell us the crazy stories of like the meetings you've had, who they've been with, the successes you've had, what failures you've had. It's going to be really fun to check back in. But looking ahead for the next 12 months, what excites you and what's keeping you up?
What excites me is the fact that everything's unknown, which is like scary, but it's also really good. And so I think there's a huge amount of opportunity still, and I think that what I've done so far is basically just build a ship that's afloat, and now I can start putting some wind into the sail.
I love that. What a great analogy.
Yeah, it's quite relevant to you, actually, wasn't it?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Feel like I'm back at sea.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, what keeps me up at night? To be honest, Tom, nothing. I'm just so happy I'm doing this. Because self-employed life is like, this morning I went to the gym, went for a swim just at like 11, just because you can, and I get so much more flexibility now. I can work late if I want, and it's fine. And also, I like the fact that what I'm working on is like directly tied to me. So if I work hard, then I like I look good for it, basically, because I put in the work. And so yeah, things are positive. I'm just like in that kind of phase of like I've had the really scary bit, and then and now I'm like settled a bit, and now looking ahead, and then it's ultimately like I have to now keep the momentum up, and that's one of the big bits of advice I've been told, actually, is like many entrepreneurs can get this initial phase going, but if you stop because you're complacent, then you can kill it because you're not still moving. And so there is an element of that, but I think it's all good.
You seem incredibly relaxed about it. Like the what excites you, what keeps you up. I think some people would say the unknown is what excites me, and others would say the unknown is what keeps me awake. And you were firmly in that's what excites me. With that in mind, do you think startups and self-employed life is for everyone? Do you think
probably not.
Do you think anyone could do it?
I think anyone could do it. Yeah, if they wanted to. But I think what you've got to do though is have like a really deep down self-belief, because I tell you, if I didn't like have a real belief that this is like my ikigai, which is what I mentioned earlier, as cringe as that is.
It's going to be the title of the episode, so brace for that.
Yeah, if I didn't have like a real drive there to do it, then I probably wouldn't have carried on, and I would have given up, and then I wouldn't be here. So I think it's just like you got to want to do it. You got to really care about what you're doing. You got to really enjoy it, because if you don't really love it, you don't really enjoy it, and you don't really care, then you're going to really fail, I think. So yeah, I think that's it. But I think anyone can do it if you've got those three.
Well, I think that is a beautiful note to end on. So, Tobin, thank you very much for joining us on Sim Sundays. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure chatting startups. So we've had a few startups now. We've had a few conversations which are with drivers. It's all about kind of performance and life racing for Red Bull, or it was, Trak Racer. Like, how do you manage multiple warehouses around the world to get your distribution right? Or it's, Thomas Jackemeyer about the Command and Conquer. Like, we've lots of like really, really interesting conversations, but the startup ones really do fascinate me. And maybe that's selfish of me because I'm kind of looking at it through my lens of doing it as well. But it's really interesting to see your approach, even in that first kind of 3 months of the journey. So thanks for sharing all that, and good luck. Where could people find more information about PACENOTE if they were curious to look it up?
Main places are pacenote.gg, if I can speak, or on LinkedIn, on my LinkedIn, and on my Twitter, which is all Tobin Leigh or Tobin Leigh 55.
Race number?
Yeah, that is my race number. That number followed me around all my life.
Nice.
But we can talk about that another time.
Do you know what? Quick, what would it be called? An encore, right? Quick encore, because I know I've just done the wrap-up bit about where can people find you. But quick encore, why PACENOTE? Why have you called it PACENOTE?
Yeah, good question. So PACENOTE is, so I like rally and I like motorsport and I like cars. And PACENOTE came to me because I was genuinely playing a rally game, and I loved the concept that the pace notes are all that get the driver at maximum speed, full attack. A pace note can get a driver from point A to point B on the most complicated rally course ever. And I think it's a bit of an analogy here where PACENOTE, the business, is guiding businesses down this really complicated but highly rewarding, trail, if you like, or rally stage. And so I just like the fact that it's all about guiding you down the next turn and doing it as fast as you possibly can or as efficiently as you possibly can. So yeah, that's PACENOTE for you.
Love it. The second best analogy of the of the podcast after the boat analogy.
Yeah.
Tobin, thank you very much. Appreciate your time, and we'll chat soon.
Thanks, Tom.
So I think it's clear from that very brief conversation with Tobin that the guy's going places. He is very well grounded in the sim racing space. He's got huge amounts of experience, and I really enjoyed chatting to him about his journey into becoming self-employed and starting his own business. It's a scary thing to do, but I've absolutely no doubt in my mind whatsoever that Tobin will make a huge success of PACENOTE. So follow him, find him on LinkedIn, find him on Twitter, because the guy is making moves in sim racing, and he's going to be a fun one to watch. Oh, Liam, I need to do the Trak Racer thing. Okay, I'm going to have to do a little cut. Thanks as always to our sponsor, Trak Racer, for sponsoring this episode. It's been nearly a year now that Trak Racer have been sponsoring the Sim Sundays podcast. So thank you for that. We appreciate it. The rig in the office gets a lot of use. So appreciate it. And remember, you can find Sim Sundays on Spotify, Apple, Google, and YouTube. So see you next time.